Hey guys, tonight we're traveling somewhere dusty, sun-soaked, and full of drama, ancient Babylon. You're standing barefoot on baked earth, the city walls towering above, all sun-bleached bricks and echoing shouts from nearby market stalls. The heat, it's not just hot, it's am I slowly roasting alive or just imagining things? Hot. Your clothes cling to you, and every breath feels like sipping dry wind through a straw made of sand. You're here for something you might never have expected. The origin story of that odd little contraption you now use to fight rainstorms or shield yourself from UV rays on a beach day. That's right, tonight's tale is all about the umbrella. Specifically, how the Babylonians came up with it before it was cool, before it folded neatly, and certainly before anyone used it to shade a latte in a sidewalk cafe. Of course, in Babylon, shade wasn't for everyone. You probably wouldn't survive this place if you weren't at least slightly important or very lucky. But don't worry, tonight you're traveling undercover as a curious but unnoticed outsider. Nobody suspects a thing. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Always love to know where this sleepy caravan stretches to. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle your way through the bustling city gates of Babylon around 1800 BCE. It's early morning, but already the air tastes like sun-warmed dust and cumin. People crowd the streets, selling fish that should have been sold yesterday, fabrics dyed with colors more expensive than your sandals, and a dozen different types of oil, all said to cure anything from baldness to bad dreams. And then you notice it. A man walking in front of what can only be described as a portable shadow. He's holding up a broad, round contraption on a long wooden pole. It casts a neat circle of darkness over a much more elaborately dressed fellow, whose eyebrows seem to be in a permanent state of mild irritation. You've just spotted a royal parasol bearer. This isn't some random sunshade. It's a symbol, a walking announcement. It says, this person under the shade, yeah, way more important than you. In Babylon, sun protection wasn't really about skincare routines or comfort. It was about hierarchy. The sun beat down equally on everyone, but only a few had the right to defy it. Kings, priests, high-ranking officials, those were your shade-worthy citizens. If you wanted cover from the sun, you'd better have a divine bloodline or at least a very convincing story. Mainstream historical fact, Babylon was one of the most advanced cities of the ancient world, with towering ziggurats, a legal code that could ruin your day in cuneiform, and a surprisingly organized bureaucracy. But in all of this complexity, they also managed to think, what if shade but fancy? Quirky tidbit time. The earliest umbrellas were likely repurposed fans or banners, held above elite heads not just for comfort, but to mark their movements in a crowd. Imagine a modern celebrity walking with a spotlight crew, but replace the light with shade and the fame with divine right swagger. Now as you pass the Ishtar Gate, its blue glazed bricks sparkling like someone spilled lapis lazuli, you realize something odd. There's almost no natural shade anywhere. The architecture favors flat rooftops and open courtyards. This is a city built under an open sky, one where shade has to be carried, constructed, or begged for. Historians still argue whether these early parasols were inspired by religious fans, foreign trade goods, or just a collective Babylonian I'm too hot for this moment. What's clear is that they took the idea seriously enough to include it in art, ritual, and royal ceremony. You trail behind the parasol bearer, staying just close enough to enjoy the fringe benefits. Literally. The edge of the umbrella is trimmed in delicate tassels that sway like sleepy dancers with each step. Occasionally one brushes your nose. You don't mind. It smells like cinnamon, and at least you're not sizzling anymore. Every few paces, the man underneath the shade waves lazily to someone. Merchants bow. Children stare. One scrappy goat attempts to eat the corner of his robe and is quickly shooed away by a child wielding a dried fig branch. You turn a corner and nearly collide with another shade bearer. This one's umbrella is square, decorated with stitched motifs of stars and winged lions. Its owner, an older woman with more rings than fingers, nods to her counterpart with the casual grace of someone who definitely owns land. Back in your own time, umbrellas are often cheap, plastic, and prone to betrayal at the slightest gust. But here, they're intricate, symbolic tools of power. They don't fold, they don't fit in a purse. They require human labor, ceremonial gravitas, and sometimes a backup bearer in case someone gets tired. The whole process is wildly inefficient and absolutely mesmerizing. There's something deeply human about the whole thing. Take an unbearable problem, say the relentless head-melting sun, and instead of hiding from it, you create an elaborate, borderline theatrical workaround. A workaround that also says, don't talk to me unless you've consulted your astrologer. It's a brilliant move, really. Shade becomes status. Suffering becomes a choice, for others at least. As you duck into a narrow alley to escape the glare, you glance up and notice the city walls have no overhangs, no awnings. But inside a courtyard, several fabric canopies stretch between poles, giving weary guards a small patch of relief. An early version of pop-up tents? Maybe. Or just a good excuse to reuse old sailcloth. The scent of roasting onions and camel leather floats by. Someone argues over the price of wheat. Somewhere, someone's playing a reed flute in a way that suggests they've only just started learning. And above it all, the sun continues to blaze down, equal parts tyrant and timekeeper. But you're following the shade, not by divine right, but by sheer curiosity. And maybe, just maybe, by the end of this journey, you'll understand how something so small, so simple, became one of history's most unlikely inventions. You follow the man with the parasol through the main street, dodging a cart loaded with amphora and a boy running suspiciously fast with a loaf of bread. The king's parasol bearer doesn't look back. He's on a mission, gliding like a tall stalk of grain in the wind, holding that symbol of comfort and power aloft like it's the city's only hope. And in a way, it kind of is. In Babylon, walking in someone's shadow isn't just metaphor, it's ambition. This parasol isn't protecting a king from UV rays. It's protecting the idea of kingship. The umbrella says, this man is chosen, touched by the gods, and also very much not interested in developing heat stroke today. The king himself rides a chariot, decked in gold and annoyance. You watch as the parasol bearer shifts positions with uncanny precision, making sure the king's head remains shaded no matter the angle. It's like a sun-powered dance, and this guy's got the choreography down cold. Mainstream historical fact, ancient Mesopotamian monarchs were not shy about showing off. From ceremonial beards to lavish temples, every symbol counted. And few things said divine favor quite like getting your own personal cloud on a stick. You duck into a shadowy doorway as the procession passes. The crowd thins behind it, as if the king's presence was both heat source and social magnet. The parasol disappears down the avenue, leaving behind only dust, murmurs, and the lingering scent of imported myrrh. Now that the royal parade has passed, you get a better look at some of the lower-ranking officials in the palace district. Turns out, they've got their own versions of umbrellas, smaller, a little patchier, and clearly handmade. One clerk walks past holding what looks like a stiffened linen triangle attached to a pole, fraying at the corners. It's not majestic, but hey, it works. Another man, pudgy, sweaty, and clearly done with today, leans against a wall with an apprentice fanning him lazily with a palm leaf the size of a dinner table. Not quite an umbrella, but you can feel the ambition. You trail the scent of clay and ink until you reach the edge of the palace scribal quarters. There, sitting in the shade of a large fig tree, Babylon's natural umbrella, if you will, is a trio of palace staffers. One of them is sketching on a tablet, his tongue poking out in concentration. The others lounge beside him, exchanging gossip in a tone just barely above whisper. You ease closer, pretending to admire the fig tree. It's working about 60% as well as an umbrella. Still, good enough for eavesdropping. The pharaoh's umbrellas are gold-tipped now, one of them mutters, flicking a beetle off his tablet. They imported silk from the east too, the other snorts. Yeah? Well, our king's got 4, one for each mood, except the angry one. The third one says, chuckling. That one just burns like the sun. They laugh in that exhausted way that suggests they've copied laws in cuneiform for 12 hours straight and are considering rebellion via paper cut. You realize in this moment that umbrellas are more than objects. They're social currency. Who holds one? Who gets to stand under it? How many tassels it has? Whether it's lined with animal gut to block the light better. whether it's just a sad-looking palm frond shoved into a stick. Every detail tells a story. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars suggest that parasols in Babylon may have originated from ceremonial fans used to cool statues of gods in temples before someone had the bright idea to use them on sweaty humans. Statues, after all, don't complain, but kings do. You slip into the courtyard behind the scribes. There's a low hum of bees from the fig tree, and someone's left out a half-eaten pomegranate. It's quiet here, a little pocket of rest. Suddenly, the parasol bearer from earlier reappears, alone this time. He ducks under the fig tree with a heavy sigh, rolls his shoulder, and mutters something unflattering about the king's chariot speed. You sit down on a stone bench and nod politely. He glances at you, decides you're not important enough to report, and begins talking as if to no one. "You ever try holding one of these things for 5 hours?" he says, gesturing to the now folded parasol. It doesn't actually fold. It just wilts dramatically, like a dying plant with delusions of nobility. "It's all about angles," he continues. "You lean too far, the king squints. You don't lean enough, the king squints. Either way, someone's angry, and it's never the sun." You nod sympathetically. He pulls out a strip of dried fig and chews moodily. Historians still argue whether the Babylonian umbrella originated independently or was inspired by earlier Egyptian models. There's some evidence that shade-bearing traditions existed in Sumer even before Babylon rose to power. But what's certain is that by the time Hammurabi was making laws, umbrellas were already walking advertisements for social superiority. The parasol bearer offers you the last bite of fig, shrugs when you decline, and trudges back toward the palace, the limp parasol dragging behind him like a sleepy dragon. You stay under the fig tree a bit longer, watching the play of light and shadow on the courtyard stones. Even here, shade feels rare, earned, not given. It's a resource, a reward, a ritual. Later, as you wander through the temple complex, you spot several priests in ceremonial robes walking beneath a canopy held aloft by 4 young attendants. It's not quite an umbrella, but close. The fabric is embroidered with sunbursts and scorpions, flapping gently in the dry breeze. The priests chant as they move, their voices low and rhythmic, like a lullaby sung by people who haven't slept in a week. You trail them for a while, noticing how the fabric glows slightly in the sun, diffusing the light into golden tones. Beautiful, yes, but also purposeful. Divine figures deserve divine shade. Eventually, they disappear into a side corridor. You glance up at the sky. The sun is still directly overhead, relentless. But now you understand. In a city of sun, shade is a story, a ritual, a ranking, an art form. And this story is just getting started. You wake from a brief doze beneath the fig tree to the familiar sound of someone yelling about barley prices. The sun hasn't moved much. It's still glaring down like it knows you personally. As you stretch and stand, brushing fig dust from your knees, you spot a caravan approaching from the east gate. The donkeys look unimpressed with life, as donkeys often do, but the goods they're carrying catch your eye. Tightly wrapped bundles of reeds, bolts of dyed cloth, and most intriguingly, a large awkward bundle lashed with string and marked with a painted sun symbol. You trail the caravan as it meanders toward the market square, where the air smells of cumin, sweat, and just a whisper of wet goat. The traders speak Akkadian, their voices rising and falling with that half-sung rhythm of people trying to sell you something before you know you want it. One of the younger traders is trying, and failing, to set up a stall. You step in, offer a helpful hand with the display poles, and as a reward, he starts talking. A lot. "These come from Elam," he says, unwrapping the sun-marked bundle. "Made for priests, but the rich folks buy them now. Lighter than wood, some even twist." You blink. Twist? And just like that, he holds up something umbrella-ish. It's made from reed ribs bound with softened leather strips, topped with a fabric canopy dyed with swirling suns. No tassels. But then he gives the pole a little turn, and the canopy tightens slightly. Not a fold exactly, but a primitive form of tension adjustment. An early ancestor of the mechanism you now curse every time it flips inside out. Mainstream historical fact. Babylon was a trade hub connecting distant cultures from the Indus Valley to the Mediterranean. And with trade came ideas like silk, lapis lazuli, fermented fish sauce, and the building blocks of the umbrella. You examine the mechanism more closely. It's both clever and clumsy, like someone tried to invent a gazebo that fits in a doorway. The trader beams with pride. They don't just keep sun off, he says. Good for light rains too, if you oil the fabric. Rain in Babylon? Rare, but not impossible. And the idea that someone saw that one seasonal drizzle and said, you know what this needs? A waterproof hat on a stick, is just beautiful. You wander away from the stall, thoughts spinning like a reed canopy in the wind. Around the market, others are testing their own shade tools. One man sells curved wooden armatures meant to be held by servants. Another boasts imported ostrich feathers tied to poles, luxury shade for those allergic to linen. Quirky tidbit, one Babylonian tablet, translated rather questionably, describes a procession in which an artificial cloud was carried above the high priest. Some scholars think this referred to incense, others, a very poetic description of a fabric parasol. Historians still argue whether these parasols were actually used by commoners in any form, or whether the versions seen in artwork were strictly ceremonial. Most lean toward the latter. Shade, after all, was not just a comfort, it was controlled. You walk past a group of apprentices struggling to erect a makeshift awning using fishnet and broken fence posts. It doesn't work. One corner keeps sagging dramatically, like it's had a long day. You resist the urge to fix it. A grandmother nearby smirks and mutters, "Kids today. Can't even trap a shadow properly." You turn down a side alley and find yourself in the artisan quarter, where smiths hammer, potters spin, and weavers argue about the color blue. Here, the parasol takes on yet another form, status and artistry. One weaver lets you peek into his workshop. He's creating a canopy not for use, but for ritual burial. Deep purple cloth embroidered with golden birds and tiny suns. The dead don't need shade, he tells you with a wink, but the gods appreciate the effort. It hits you then. In this world, an umbrella isn't just a tool. It's a prayer, a wish to be noticed, a request for comfort in a world that offers very little of it. You're not just blocking the sun, you're carving out a space for peace, however small. Outside, a child runs by holding a miniature umbrella made of papyrus and string. It's crooked and floppy and perfect. He laughs as it spins above him like a tiny flying saucer. You smile, then something hits your shoulder. You flinch. It's water. You look up. Clouds? No. A careless washer on a rooftop dumped their basin. Still, for one glorious second, you consider opening an umbrella. But of course you don't have one. So you walk, damp and smiling, past the market stalls and canopied shrines, past vendors and shade-proud nobles. You take in the textures, the rhythms, the thousands of tiny gestures that make up daily life in ancient Babylon. Somewhere, a reed flute starts up again, still off-key. And above it all, that merciless, magnificent sun. Your tunic is mostly dry by the time you reach the edge of the ziggurat's shadow, arguably the most exclusive shade in the entire city. Towering above the baked mud brick rooftops like a layer cake for a sky god, the ziggurat casts a shadow that seems almost smug in its precision. No umbrella competes with this. This is architectural shade, divine shade. But unlike parasols, which can be carried and angled and even swung at nosy goats, this shadow doesn't follow you. You follow it. The priests at the base eye you with polite suspicion. You're not on any guest list, and your scent says fig tree nap, more than noble petition. Still, you blend in well enough. You drift through a cluster of pilgrims, all whispering prayers to Marduk, Babylon's chief deity, and, according to one stone carving, an enormous curly-haired man who holds either a lightning bolt or a very enthusiastic snake. Mainstream historical fact, ziggurats were religious centers, but also astronomical observatories. Their construction aligned with celestial movements, allowing priests to track solstices, equinoxes, and maybe even decide when it was fashionable to harvest lentils. But today, the focus isn't on stars. It's on staying alive under the eye-melting sun. You follow a priest's assistant hauling up a stack of ritual objects, one of which is unmistakably parasol adjacent. A stiff linen square mounted on a rod, embroidered with tiny lions. He leans it against a statue of Ishtar, goddess of love, war, and excellent accessorizing. You slip into the line, heading up the ziggurat. The steps are narrow, steep, and designed less for comfort and more for calf development. You pass torch holders, small altars, and at least 2 exhausted pigeons. Partway up, you encounter a royal archivist wheezing under a thick roll of papyrus and an utterly enormous hat. He stops to mop his brow and nods at your lack of hat. Dangerous, he says. The gods notice pink scalps. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient texts mention that umbrellas were occasionally used indoors, not for shade, but to symbolically protect sacred space, like a hat you wear for the room's feelings. Near the top tier, you finally spot it, a ceremonial parasol in action. 4 servants hold it aloft, creating a rectangular pool of soft shadow for a high priest reading divination signs in a bowl of water. The priest's robes shimmer with fine thread. His brow is furrowed like a raisin deep in thought. He swirls the water, nods to himself, and declares something about favorable winds and a need for more dates at tomorrow's feast. Historians still argue whether the use of parasols in religious rituals denoted divine approval or merely practical priestly self-care. There's evidence for both, but standing here, watching a man commune with the gods while being lightly shaded by 4 trembling teenagers, it's hard not to see the sacred in the simple. You find a spot near a column where a tiny wedge of shadow promises momentary relief. As you sit, a gust of wind catches a scrap of fabric, a discarded temple offering maybe, and flips it into the air. It dances briefly before landing on your lap. It's thin linen, stiff with dye, probably once part of a banner or a very enthusiastic prayer flag. You fold it into a square, twist a reed from the edge of the path, and, without quite meaning to, you build your own miniature sunshade. It won't impress a king, but it makes a difference. As you hold it above your head, a temple cat eyes you from the stairwell. You half expect it to judge you, but instead it stretches luxuriously and sprawls in the shadow of your improvised umbrella. Even the cats of Babylon understand the value of portable shade. A bell rings behind you, low, metallic, and startlingly close. A procession is forming again, this one smaller than the king's parade, but no less dramatic. A group of healers, dressed in blue-gray robes, carry a canopy between them. Beneath it walks an elderly woman hunched with age and decorated with charms, herbs, and at least one small lizard. You hear a whisper, the midwife of Marduk. She walks as though the ziggurat is hers. The canopy above her ripples gently in the wind, sheltering not just her, but the story she represents: healing, birth, mystery. She's carried more lives into the world than most people have loaves of bread. And today she gets shade. You watch her pass and realize umbrellas, parasols, canopies, they all mark something. Power, yes, but also reverence. Who we value, who we protect, who we notice. As the crowd disperses, the sun slides westward, casting long amber shadows across the temple floor. Your fabric square droops sadly to one side. It was never meant for endurance. Still, you tuck it under your tunic as you descend the ziggurat. A keepsake. A memory of the moment you joined thousands of years of humanity in saying, hey, what if the sun didn't ruin everything? You step back into the noise of the city, where carts rattle, goats bleat, and a man yells about a 2-for-1 barley deal that definitely sounds like a trap. But your mind lingers on that tiny pool of shadow at the top of the ziggurat, on sacred umbrellas and sun-kissed prayers, and on the fact that even gods might need a break from the heat. You decide it's time to walk somewhere cooler, if such a place exists. Maybe the canal side, where the breeze carries the scent of wet reeds and overwatered onions. You follow a crooked lane that smells strongly of roasted garlic and faintly of regret. Around you, merchants are starting to pack up, pulling their makeshift awnings tighter against the setting sun. The parasols of the elite may strut through temples and ceremonies, but here in the working quarters, shade comes in the form of patched cloth, prop doors, and sheer optimism. A boy darts past you, holding a pot of fish paste and wearing an expression of someone about to lose it all. Moments later, a flustered woman barrels after him, waving a sandal in one hand and a sunshade in the other. She's using it as a weapon, which feels spiritually correct. This neighborhood is different from the Ziggurat Plaza. No golden lions, no high priests, just butchers, potters, and mud brick dreams. But here too, shade is sacred. You pass a courtyard where 3 families have lashed together every cloth scrap they own, turning their shared space into a patchy cave of cool air and whispered gossip. Mainstream historical fact: Babylonian homes often had inner courtyards designed to catch whatever breezes the gods allowed and minimize direct sunlight. Early urban air conditioning. If you were lucky and knew a mason who owed you a favor, You're waved over by a woman balancing a basket of leeks. She sees you squinting and thrusts a square of palm frond weave into your hand. "Too pale to be out here," she says. "You'll cook like lamb fat." You thank her. It's not technically an umbrella, more a glorified placemat, but it does the job. You perch beside her stall, watching as the sun sinks just enough to paint the bricks gold instead of glaring white. The change in light is so gentle, it's almost musical. Behind you, someone clears their throat. It's an old man sitting on a barrel, wearing sandals that have seen better centuries. He nods toward your palm shade. "Funny thing," he says, "we used to use those to fan fires. Then some genius decided not burning was also a good idea." You raise an eyebrow. He continues without being asked. "Of course he does. First ones I saw weren't from here. Traders brought them from the east. Said in their country, rich people got buried with them." Buried! Imagine that, spending your afterlife trying to stay tan-free. Quirky tidbit. There's a long-standing Mesopotamian folktale about a king whose umbrella was stolen by a mischievous wind god. The god, apparently bored during a festival, blew the parasol clean into the Euphrates. The king ordered 3 weeks of mourning for the umbrella, not the festival. Historians still argue whether this tale was symbolic of divine disfavor or just a very early umbrella joke. Babylonian humor, like their building codes, was layered. The old man points down the alley. "Go that way," he says. "You'll find the dye vats. They've started weaving umbrellas with lapis stripes now." Fancy. Looks like a priest's dream and costs half a donkey. You thank him, pocket the palm mat, and set off again. The dye quarter is unmistakable. You smell it before you see it. The air thickens with the scent of minerals, sour wine, and something undeniably purple. You pass rows of vats where fabric is being dunked and wrung out. Young apprentices, their arms dyed up to the elbow, gossip while they stomp bundles of reed fiber into pliable shapes. One has a sunshade balanced precariously on his head like a hat that gave up halfway. A master dyer, recognizable by the purple ring under her nails and her general air of exhausted wisdom, waves you over. "You here to buy?" she asks, not unkindly. You shake your head. "Just admiring," she grunts. "Tourists," she mutters, but hands you a square of silk anyway. It's still damp and smells vaguely of wet beetles. "That's indigo, imported, costs more than your liver." You unfold the silk. It's light, breathable, and when held up to the light, you can almost imagine it catching the sun just enough to filter, not block it. You imagine someone crafting a parasol out of this. It wouldn't shade so much as bathe you in blue, like walking beneath a private sky. You ask if anyone makes parasols here. The dyer nods. "My niece, clever girl, weaves reed spokes into linen she dyes herself, sells them to anyone who can spell sunburn." You smile. Somewhere between temple canopies and donkey caravans, the umbrella has become not just sacred or royal, but personal. Crafted, decorated, stitched with family patterns and lucky birds. Every parasol tells a story. You leave the dye quarter as twilight slips over the rooftops. The air cools slightly, and you can almost forget that your shoulders feel like roasted lentils. Above, the first stars blink into view. Below, torches flicker to life in doorways and alleys. You catch sight of another child twirling a tiny umbrella, this one made of dyed papyrus and what might be goose feathers. It spins, catches the lamplight, and glows. And just like that, you realize Babylon didn't just invent the umbrella, it reimagined it, again and again, until it became a language, a way to say, this space is mine, this space is safe, this space has shade. By now, the sky has softened into that deep violet blue that only Babylon seems to manage, where the dusk feels more like warm silk than empty air. Your feet are sore, your skin buzzes from too much sun, and your borrowed palm shade is beginning to unravel at the edges. But something tugs at you still. You've heard whispers all day about the House of Winds, a place near the edge of the city where artisans test experimental designs, including what some are calling the floating umbrella. You're skeptical. It sounds like something a priest would invent during a fever dream. Still, it's the kind of rumor that sticks, and your curiosity is just caffeinated enough to win over your aching calves. You pass under crumbling archways and along quieter roads, where shepherds hum lullabies to their goats and elderly women sweep dust from their thresholds like it's a sport. Lanterns swing from doorposts. A chicken stares at you judgmentally. Babylon by night feels like the same city wearing a different personality, slower, dreamier, and maybe even a little generous. Eventually, you reach a half-ruined tower, long abandoned by temple elites, and now humming with a different kind of energy. The courtyard is dim, lit only by oil lamps and the occasional spark from a brazier. A group of inventors is clustered around a contraption that looks like a fishing net, had an argument with a ceiling fan. You pause at the gate, unsure if you found the House of Winds or a very confusing dinner party. Mainstream historical fact: Babylonian science was no joke. Their scholars developed detailed astronomical records, experimented with early hydraulics, and were obsessed with geometry long before Pythagoras ever got his first triangle tattoo. "Don't touch that!" someone yells suddenly, and you instinctively snatch your hand back from what you now realize is not a decorative urn but a pressure vessel. A young woman, grimy, smiling, possibly brilliant, waves you over. "Looking for shade?" she asks, grinning. You nod. She points to a square of fabric suspended from a set of reeds and copper rods, swaying gently in the breeze created by some hidden bellows system. The entire thing is floating, barely like a lazy ghost. "We're trying to make it follow you," she explains, "like a shadow that thinks for itself." Quirky tidbit: one Babylonian myth tells of a servant cursed to carry an umbrella that would always turn inside out in the wind, a punishment for eavesdropping on a goddess's foot bath. Ancient Sumerians, always weirdly specific with their divine justice. You sit beside her and watch the prototype bob in midair. It's unstable, clearly unfinished, but somehow still magical. A sort of proto-drone with all the elegance of a jellyfish on vacation. She offers you a cup of warm barley tea and when pressed tells you her name is Taja. Her hands are calloused, ink-stained, and incredibly fast. She sketches parasol designs on bits of parchment as you talk. Some are practical: ribbed canopies, collapsible rods, tension string releases. Others are ambitious. One design shows a man suspended beneath a giant umbrella like a parachute. You never know. She shrugs. Historians still argue whether Babylon's artisans pursued these inventions purely for function or also for prestige. Inscriptions from elite homes mention shade worthy of kings and umbrellas that whisper secrets. Some think these were poetic turns of phrase. Others suspect real attempts at mechanical shade or very moody servants. Taja gestures toward a tarp covering a bulky shape in the corner. "That one," she says, "built for a camel." You blink. "A camel parasol?" She nods, perfectly serious. "Merchant caravans want it. Keep the animals from overheating. Costs a fortune, but beats losing a camel to heat stroke. They spit less too." You decide this is the most practical thing you've heard all day. As the night deepens, more artisans join the courtyard. Someone brings dates and a harp. A small, sleepy child plays with miniature parasols made from baked reeds and shell buttons, twirling them slowly in the firelight. There's laughter, quiet arguments, and the occasional shriek when something breaks. You feel for a moment like you've wandered into the dreams of a civilization, one that doesn't just endure the sun, but dares to reshape its rules. You borrow a stylus and draw a crude umbrella yourself. Taja peers at it and nods, then flips the parchment over and draws the same design, with about 5 improvements. Together, you add your scribble to the wall of tries, a collection of failed and almost successful ideas pinned to the old tower bricks. Some designs are water-stained, some burned, but all loved. It's like a shrine to ambition. As you stand to leave, Taja hands you a folded strip of blue-dyed linen. "Next time it rains," she says, "pretend it's for that." You thank her and tuck it into your belt. The stars overhead seem closer now, like tiny spectators watching humans try to build small fabric-covered heavens. On the way back, the city feels different. Not cooler, never truly cool in Babylon, but richer somehow. You pass a sleeping dog curled beneath a roof tile awning, a market stall covered in woven sun hats, and a scroll vendor with a parasol propped above a basket of poems. Everywhere you look, shade has become not just relief, but ritual, a quiet rebellion against the tyranny of the sky. And you, once a sweaty wanderer without a clue, now walk with the confidence of someone who's seen the future, held together with copper wire and hope. You wake the next morning to the low thump of sandals on clay and the unmistakable trill of someone shouting about dates being half price, only until the sun reaches the statue's armpit. Babylonian timekeeping, as poetic as it is vague. You stretch beneath a faded awning, your makeshift parasol tucked under one arm, and wander out to rejoin the city. Today, you're headed to the river quarter. It's where the real action happens, where water, trade, and shade collide in delightful, sometimes muddy chaos. The walk takes you past mud brick homes with laundry lines that double as community notice boards. One reads, "Lost Goat, answers to nothing." Another, "Shade seller wanted, must not faint easily." The Euphrates glitters ahead, as smug and slow as a cat in the sun. Along the banks, fishermen hurl nets, washerwomen slap linen like they mean it, and ferry drivers yell over one another about whose boat leaks least. You board a reed skiff with a captain who looks roughly 90% sunburnt and 10% sandal. She squints at your palm shade. "New model?" she asks. "Prototype," you reply with an entirely unwarranted air of confidence. She shrugs and pulls you out into the water. You glide past floating markets, where parasols bloom like giant flowers over boats full of fish, spices, and gossip. The breeze off the river makes everything feel less tragic, even the price of lentils. Mainstream historical fact: Babylonian rivers weren't just for trade, they were literal lifelines. Canals diverted water into the city for irrigation, sanitation, and crucially, to cool down the populace during those legendary 110-degree days. The riverfront was where public life flowed. You pass a water station where young boys fill clay jars and older men argue about whose nephew is more useless. Overhead, striped awnings ripple in the wind, suspended from poles jabbed into anything that'll hold them. Some boats even have built-in umbrella posts, a sure sign that someone's figured out how to turn laziness into innovation. You spot an old merchant squatting beneath a massive canopy sewn from what looks like sailcloth and hope. He's selling salt, incense, and, more importantly, custom parasol kits. The sign reads, "Make your own shade, impress the gods, or at least your mother-in-law." Quirky tidbit: in one Babylonian marriage contract found near the riverbanks, a husband was legally obligated to provide adequate shade for his wife while traveling. The fine for failing to do so? 1 silver mina and public humiliation by hat throwing. Priorities: you disembark at the western docks where the parasol trade has taken on a life of its own. Here, parasols aren't just sun blockers, they're status, art, and flirtation devices. A red parasol with gold fringe might say wealthy and available, while one painted with lions suggests, "Please don't ask me about my previous husbands." You duck into a riverside tea house with a fabric awning so wide it could double as a circus tent. The walls are plastered with sketches of umbrellas throughout history. Well, their history. From palm leaf shields to wheeled shade carts pulled by donkeys. A man approaches your table, carrying what looks like a peacock on a stick. Turns out it's a fan umbrella hybrid. The peacock tail can open and close with a cord. You ask how it works. He responds with, "Not very well in wind." Historians still argue whether these hybrid contraptions were functional tools or ceremonial toys. Some scrolls describe shade stand competitions during summer festivals, basically an ancient design fair, complete with prizes for most impractical but beautiful. You sip date wine and listen to the couple at the next table debate which material makes for the best parasol lining: goat leather, durable but sweaty, versus crushed mulberry bark, elegant but flammable. One man claims a friend of his swears by beetle shells. You choose not to follow up. Back outside, a young artist paints parasol patterns for clients: spirals, vines, symbols to confuse or impress the sun gods. One woman demands the exact hue of wet reeds, which is met with the artist's expression that says, "Ah yes, another poet with money." You notice that most parasols now have evolved beyond the simple stick and circle model. There are segmented arms, twist mechanisms, even double canopies for ventilation. Innovation is the new religion here, and everyone's praying with fabric and string. As you meander along the promenade, a small parade begins. Children carrying decorated umbrellas, spinning them to the beat of drums. Their laughter ricochets off the stone, mingling with the river breeze and the smell of roasted onions. You follow them for a bit, enjoying the chaos. Then suddenly, a gust of wind lifts a particularly ambitious parasol from its owner's hands. It sails upward like a startled bird and lands in the water with a dramatic plop. Everyone cheers, like this is the best thing that's happened all week. You smile. Somehow in this city of heat and dust and ambition, Even umbrella mishaps feel sacred. You head back across the dock, your palm shade finally giving out with a heroic flop. You fold it respectfully and tuck it into a potter's garbage bin, an informal Babylonian burial, if you will. And as you walk away, the sun begins to dip again. Long shadows stretch across the river, merging with parasols, awnings, sails, and dreams. You're not just wandering anymore. You're tracing the outline of a city that turned a simple invention into a whole language, one stitched together by heat, need, and imagination. Your steps carry you inland again, away from the glitter of the Euphrates, toward one of the oldest neighborhoods in Babylon, the clay-walled maze of Enlil's Crescent. It's quieter here. The streets narrow to walking paths, barely wide enough for two donkeys in a grudge match. But that's part of the charm. These lanes have watched millennia of sun-baked living, and somehow, people here have found more inventive ways to chase shade than anywhere else in the city. A boy jogs past with a basket on his head, the basket cleverly topped with a lid shaped like a small parasol. It spins slightly as he runs, casting a stuttering shadow over his nose. That's when you realize this neighborhood might be ground zero for parasol hacks. Mainstream historical fact: Babylonian urban planning often prioritized shade. Homes were built close together, forming natural corridors of coolness. Some streets were intentionally aligned east-west to maximize afternoon relief. It wasn't just functional, it was a way of life, sculpted by climate and necessity. You duck under a canopy strung between two houses. It's made from dyed wool, and the pattern resembles a ziggurat flipped upside down. A woman hanging laundry offers you a fig and tells you, with zero irony, that her grandmother invented the world's first retractable clothesline shade. Retractable, you ask, mouth full of fig. She yanks a cord and the entire shade zips upward like a startled moth. You blink. She grins. Just don't do it in high wind. Nearly took out the neighbor's goat. Quirky tidbit: some Babylonian homes featured cooling roofs, sunlight diffusing panels made of woven reeds soaked in river water and laid across rafters. Not exactly air conditioning, but definitely the ancient version of just open a window and suffer less. You pass by a public square where elders gather under what looks like a massive shared umbrella, wide enough to cover 8 people and low enough to force everyone into a dignified hunch. They're playing a board game with pebbles and whispering arguments that somehow sound both civil and deadly serious. You wonder if they've been playing the same game since Hammurabi was still learning to write angry laws. In the corner of the square is a tiny shopfront shaped like a half shell. Inside, a woman is etching symbols into thin slats of cedar. She notices your lingering gaze and gestures you in. These are charm parasols, she explains. You write a worry on one side, a hope on the other, then shade yourself with it until the ink fades. When it's blank again, you've either solved it or forgotten what you were worried about. You buy one. As you wander back into the residential alleys, you start to notice how many parasols around here are hybrids. One child's parasol doubles as a fan. Another woman has a shade that can be clipped to her water jug, hydration and sun protection in one awkward, genius contraption. Historians still argue whether these multifunctional parasols were signs of everyday inventiveness or evidence of a deeper, semi-religious reverence for shade. Some texts refer to the veil of Utu, a divine shade said to protect the righteous from the god of the sun's full fury. Whether metaphor or marketing slogan, the idea stuck. You stop at a small temple nestled between homes. It's dedicated to Ninlil, goddess of air, grain, and gentle winds, a triple threat portfolio. Worshippers here have left tiny parasols as offerings. Some are carved from bone. Others are fashioned from corn husks. One looks suspiciously like it was made from an uncooperative fish skeleton. The priest, spotting your interest, invites you to sit beneath the temple's central shade, a circular canopy that slowly rotates as the sun moves. Powered, apparently, by a system of pulleys and a man named Razu, who just really enjoys turning cranks. You sit with the priest for a while, sipping barley beer and trading weather complaints. Too hot to think, he mutters, which is exactly when the gods like to test us. He tells you of an old parable. 2 travelers cross a desert. One carries water, the other an umbrella. Only one makes it. The moral? Always carry both, but trust the one that keeps your brain from boiling. You can't argue with desert logic. Outside again, a dust storm begins to stir on the horizon. You spot neighbors unfurling shades not just above their heads, but across alleyways, between pots, over windows, even over street cats who clearly didn't ask for this, but seem to tolerate it. This isn't just parasol culture, it's parasol choreography. You help a child refasten a wind-loosened shade. He thanks you with a miniature model carved from soapstone. You don't know what to do with it, so you tie it to your belt like a tiny ceremonial accessory. It clinks as you walk. The wind picks up. The sky turns ochre. You take shelter under a layered awning behind a bakery that smells like spiced heaven. Other strays join you. A potter, two laughing teens, a woman holding a goose who looks mildly annoyed at everything. No one speaks for a while. There's just the whap-whap of loose canvas and the gentle flurry of sand against the world. And somehow, as the dust swirls outside your patch of handmade shade, you realize this city isn't just surviving the sun. It's turned shade into something close to sacred. They've built a culture around comfort, around cleverness, around ducking the sky and still standing tall. It's beautiful, it's ridiculous, it's Babylon. And in your lap, the charm parasol's ink has already begun to fade. The storm clears as suddenly as it came, leaving behind a fine layer of dust on everything, including your eyebrows, which now look suspiciously like they belong to an elderly scribe. You dust yourself off, thank the goose-holding woman with a polite nod. She doesn't respond, her goose does, and head northward. You're on your way to visit one of Babylon's true eccentrics, Master Tunic, a retired priest turned inventor, known for creating the most ridiculous, borderline magical sunshades in the entire city. Think early Da Vinci, but with more linen and fewer boundaries. His home is tucked near the city's edge, just beyond a set of date palms that lean like tired librarians. As you approach, you notice strange silhouettes hanging in the trees, objects that look like umbrellas crossed with musical instruments. One spins, one whistles, one is on fire, very calmly. Mainstream historical fact: Babylonian temples were not just religious centers, they were often hubs of technological tinkering. Priests had time, education, and access to materials, which made them ideal candidates for early experimentation in everything from irrigation to timekeeping to, yes, shade devices. Tunic welcomes you with arms flung wide and robes covered in soot. "You're just in time for the morning collapse," he shouts, leading you through a curtain made of fishnet and dried reeds. Inside, it's like walking into a sunshade's fever dream. Dozens of parasols dangle from the ceiling, most half-opened or mid-meltdown. There's one with mirrored panels meant to reflect heat. It does, but only into your face. Another hums gently as it spins. A third appears to be made entirely of feathers and bad decisions. Tunic pours you a cup of tamarind tea and gestures at his latest invention, a folding parasol with a built-in sundial. Tells the time while shading your head, he explains. Also doubles as a hat, weapon, or extremely judgmental compass. Quirky tidbit: among Tunic's collection is a clay tablet etched with an ancient recipe for cool shade essence, an oil made from crushed lotus petals, mint, and whispers over cold water. The application: dab it on your parasol for divine breezes. Spoiler: it smells like regret and floral soap. He takes you to the courtyard, where apprentices are testing a new creation, the Babelbrella. It's two shades connected by a hinge, worn like wings. When opened, the user looks like a butterfly. When closed, like someone in denial. The trial run doesn't go well. One apprentice spins too fast, catches wind like a glider, and promptly topples into a fountain. Everyone claps. You ask Tunic what motivates all this. He strokes his beard thoughtfully and says, "Because the sun is arrogant, and someone has to challenge it politely." Historians still argue whether inventors like Tunic were outliers or examples of a broader artisan class supported by temple economies. Some scrolls even hint at inner-city parasol competitions, like ancient tech expos, where cities like Nippur or Uruk might present innovations in shade, storage, or sandals. Tunic shows you a clay model of what he calls the city shade serpent, a long train-like parasol that could cover an entire caravan as it moved. It would need 40 men to carry, he says, and one very stubborn donkey. There's a rustle at the gate, and a courier arrives with a scroll wrapped in an embroidered sleeve. Tunic reads it, smiles, and says, "They want me to judge this year's Summer Shade Festival. Must be my charming personality." You tag along as Tunic prepares a demonstration piece. It's called the Wandering Crescent, a parasol designed to track the sun automatically using weighted beads and a clever balance system. In theory, it adjusts itself so you always have optimal coverage. In practice, it kind of just leans dramatically and hopes for the best. On the way to the festival site, you help him carry the parts. People in the street stop and admire the craftsmanship, or at least stare at the glittery fringe and mutter things like, "What is it this time?" The festival grounds are chaotic in the best way. Stalls selling palm leaf shades, shaved melon ice, and fan upgrades line the perimeter. Children run between displays with mini umbrellas strapped to their heads like tiny weather satellites. A woman gives a demonstration of her new parasol made from eel skin, waterproof and ethically confusing. Tunic approves. As his creation is assembled center stage, the crowd quiets. The wandering crescent rises, slowly, creakily, and a little off-center. It begins to move. Then pause. Then tilt gently toward a man selling fried locusts. Everyone applauds anyway. Backstage, Tunic beams. It didn't collapse this time. That's progress. You find a shady spot beneath an elaborate woven canopy and sip cold fig juice. Nearby, two rival inventors argue over shade angles and accuse each other of measuring with envy, not rope. A donkey sneezes theatrically in the background. The sun dips lower and long lines of golden light stretch across the ground. Parasol shadows flutter like paper birds. And somewhere, someone launches a shade kite that drifts so high, even the sun looks mildly impressed. This city, you realize, doesn't just endure heat. It celebrates the act of resisting it with style, humor, and just enough madness to keep things interesting. You glance at Tunic, who's now drawing blueprints in the dust with a piece of chicken bone. "Solar funnel shade helmet," he murmurs. "Also good for soup." You sip your juice, you nod. You've absolutely no idea what that means, but it somehow feels like the future. The day winds down, and the city turns a honeyed shade of quiet. People begin folding their parasols with the same reverence reserved for prayer mats. Some are careful and deliberate, wiping each rib clean of dust, folding it slowly, almost ceremonially. Others roll theirs up like rugs and toss them over a shoulder. In Babylon, shade is both sacred and scrappy. You leave the festival grounds with Tunic's final words echoing in your head. If it doesn't keep you cool, at least let it make you laugh. Your path veers toward the old scribal quarter, where the streets are wider, the buildings more symmetrical, and the parasols, well, they come with footnotes. This is where Babylon's scholars, accountants, and bureaucrats reside. Think ancient nerd paradise. Here, shade isn't just for comfort, it's for thinking, debating, arguing about where the comma-shaped cuneiform mark actually goes. Mainstream historical fact, Babylonian scribes were essential to every facet of life. They documented trade, laws, astrology, omens, and crucially, patent-like inscriptions for inventions. Some clay tablets from this quarter include rudimentary diagrams of objects we'd now call parasols, labeled with poetic phrases like the canopy that mimics a mountain or portable dusk. You pass under a stretched fabric awning covered in scribbles, notes, equations, shopping lists, maybe a love poem or two. Shade and thought intertwined. A group of young apprentices sits in a circle, copying glyphs onto slates while muttering memory rhymes. You eavesdrop on one. When your head grows hot and your thoughts unwind, raise your shade and calm your mind. Classic nerd poetry. One scholar, noticing your interest, invites you into his writing garden, a courtyard framed with climbing vines and paper-thin parasols that spin slowly in the breeze like sleepy ceiling fans. He offers you a seat on a bench made of compacted scroll tubes. Here, parasols are status symbols. The more poetic the description etched into its frame, the higher your intellectual clout. His own parasol bears the phrase, "I block not the sun, but its distractions." Somewhere, a philosophy student is probably crying. Quirky tidbit, some scribes believe certain shapes of shade could affect mood and cognition. Triangular parasols were said to stimulate decisive thought. Round ones, contemplation. Square ones, bureaucracy. Naturally, a few mavericks started carrying octagonal shades, just to mess with everyone. Your host, his name is Akil by the way, pulls out a series of tablets cataloging parasol designs across Mesopotamia. There are regional trends, the rounded, bowl-like shades of the south, the rigid crossbeam styles of the Zagros foothills. The dramatically oversized honor umbrellas of royal scribes who apparently liked to be very sure everyone knew who was in charge of the shade. He shows you one particularly odd tablet that sparked debate for decades. It depicts a man holding what looks like a dual-bladed parasol, each side rotating in opposite directions. A mistake, you ask? Akil grins. Or a lost science? Historians still argue whether these sketches reflect real inventions, prototypes, or merely the dreams of shade-starved intellectuals with too much time and too little breeze. There's even a theory that parasols were used as mnemonic devices, with symbols or verses painted on their undersides to help scribes remember complex chants or formulas. A literal umbrella of knowledge. Akil pours a cup of date-infused wine and talks about his own theory, that shade in Babylon was a metaphor as much as a physical comfort. To seek shade, he says, was to seek clarity, shelter from excess, from distraction, from heat, literal and metaphorical. You nod, impressed, until a gust of wind flips his parasol inside out with the drama of a failed Shakespeare audition. He sighs. Metaphors are fragile. He offers to walk you to the edge of the quarter, where an old stone platform overlooks the city's rooftops. Along the way, he points out various rooftop shades, awnings on pulleys, beams that pivot with the sun, clusters of papyrus umbrellas jammed into clay pots like a garden of cautious optimism. From the platform, you can see the distant shimmer of the hanging gardens, still misted from their elaborate irrigation system. The sunlight flickers off thousands of shades, tents, sails, and covers across Babylon, like sequins stitched into the fabric of time. Akil leaves you with a final scroll, blank, but beautifully bound in dyed leather. You've walked through a city of shade, he says. Maybe now, write your own. You sit. The scroll rests in your lap like a quiet challenge. The breeze turns cooler, bells chime in the distance. Someone nearby begins to sing. Not loud, not performative, just a melody to mark the close of day. And over your head you hold a parasol made from palm frond and reeds, its surface painted with swirling sleepy ink. The city hums. The sky softens, and for just a moment, you think maybe Tunic and Akil are both right. Shade doesn't have to make sense. It just has to feel like peace. The breeze follows you through the city like a polite dog, warm and gentle and just curious enough to keep sniffing at your ankles. With the scribal quarter behind you and Akil's empty scroll tucked into your satchel, you decide to meander toward one of the lesser-known districts, the textile quarter, Babylon's colorful underbelly, literally and metaphorically. This is where shade gets serious. If parasols are art in the temples and philosophy among the scribes, here they are a business, a lifestyle, and, depending on who you ask, a competitive blood sport. You enter under a dyed linen archway. Its colors so vibrant, you momentarily wonder if your eyes have been reset to factory settings. Cloth merchants, seamstresses, dye masters, and umbrella makers yell at each other across stalls in a chorus of insults so poetic they might qualify as epic verse. Mainstream historical fact: Babylon's textile economy was a powerhouse, with complex trade networks exporting dyed fabrics as far as the Indus Valley and the Mediterranean. Colors weren't just aesthetic. They were indicators of status, wealth, and sometimes temple allegiance. The deeper the hue, the more expensive and prestigious the dye. And the parasols? They were like peacock feathers on a stick. One merchant waves you over, brandishing what he calls a summer storm shade, a dark blue parasol that turns iridescent in bright light. Dyed with indigo and beetle shell, he says proudly, also repels pessimism and weak poetry. You wander deeper, and the parasols get stranger. There's one woven entirely from flattened reeds, one shaped like a lotus flower that closes when touched by rain, and another with decorative tassels that chime softly when the wind shifts direction. Quirky tidbit: some elite parasols were embedded with tiny bells, beads, or reflective fragments so they'd sparkle as they moved through crowds. In Babylon, a parasol wasn't just about avoiding sunburn. It was a mobile performance. Some wealthier patrons even hired parasol bearers whose job was to angle the shade just right and look aloof while doing it. You pause at a workshop where parasols are being assembled. It smells like damp linen, olive oil, and ambition. Young apprentices argue over rib placement, while an older woman supervises with the calm of someone who has threaded needles blindfolded during a sandstorm. She introduces herself as Irdaniah, chief designer for House of Shade, a respected umbrella atelier for nobility, temples, and anyone willing to part with half their harvest for some fashionable shadow. She invites you in and shows you how a high-end parasol is born. First, a bamboo or tamarisk frame is shaped, then covered in layered fabric dyed with plant-based pigments. There's a section for embellishments, miniature embroidered symbols meant to represent good fortune, wisdom, or, in one cheeky example, just leave me alone. Historians still argue whether these parasol workshops were part of larger guild systems or more loosely affiliated families passing down trade secrets. Some tablets suggest exclusive contracts between temples and certain umbrella artisans, early monopolies if you will. A Babylonian patent war, minus the lawyers and plus a lot of linen. Irdeniah shows you her masterpiece in progress, a double canopy parasol with rotating layers. The top catches wind and spins gently, while the lower tier remains stable for shade. Keeps air moving, she says. Also distracts nosy neighbors. She lets you try assembling one. It takes all your concentration just to align the ribs without poking yourself in the eye. Eventually, you manage to attach a sail-shaped panel of turquoise-dyed cloth and give it a modest spin. Well done, she nods. You may now call yourself Shade Artisan Level 1. You beam. You also manage to glue a feather to your sleeve by accident, but she doesn't say anything. Outside, a crowd gathers for the end-of-day shade reveal, where new designs are unfurled to the public. It's part catwalk, part spiritual procession. Music plays, a slow rhythmic melody on flutes and drums. Models glide by holding the latest in parasol couture, billowing canopies that shimmer, angular shades that fold like origami, one model wearing a parasol with a built-in incense burner that leaves a fragrant trail behind her. Children imitate them with leaf fans and wide grins. Elders nod in approval. Somewhere in the crowd, a goat sneezes and a parasol collapses in response, as if offended. You sit on a crate and watch the display. The sky turns a deep amber, and the parasols glow like low-hanging stars. You find yourself imagining which one you'd pick if you had the choice. Something understated, maybe. Quietly clever, with a hidden pocket for snacks. Irdeniah joins you, handing over a small folded shade as a gift. It's simple, 2 panels of woven grass stitched with what looks like a sleeping lizard. For travelers, she says. Lightweight, folds into a pillow, smells like basil if you sweat enough. You laugh, you thank her. You sling it over your back like a sleepy soldier of shade. As night begins to fall, torches are lit and the textile quarter glows warm and alive. Music continues, and somewhere, a parasol bursts into flame, not disastrously, but with just enough flair to be considered an encore. You walk back through the market, slower now. Every awning, every flutter of dyed cloth, every parasol overhead feels like a tapestry of human creativity, woven from the simple need to stay cool and the persistent urge to do it fabulously. And tomorrow, you suspect, there'll be a new design, a new idea, a new complaint from someone whose parasol snapped mid-strut. Because in Babylon, shade never sleeps. By now, the streets of Babylon have softened into something dreamlike. Lanterns flicker behind fabric walls. The scent of roasted barley and crushed date pits lingers in the air, and a distant flute stumbles through a lullaby only half remembered by its player. You're walking slower, not just because you're tired, but because the city itself seems to whisper, "Take your time." You head north, where the Euphrates curls like a sleepy serpent and the noble estates lie scattered along its banks. Here, the parasols are quieter, less peacock, more poetry. Ivory handles, canopies stitched with verses. One parasol you pass has the symbol for stillness embroidered in the center, visible only when it catches the light just so. You're invited into a small garden villa by a servant who says his mistress enjoys collecting rare shade. You don't know what that means, but the alternative is walking into more darkness without a snack. So in you go. Mainstream historical fact. Babylon's upper classes lived in luxurious homes built of sun-dried bricks, often centered around internal courtyards with fountains, trees, and shaded walkways. These villas weren't just for status, they were functional havens from the harsh climate. Shade wasn't a side benefit, it was the architecture's main act. Inside, you meet the mistress, Nabitu, an older woman with silver hair braided like rope and eyes that probably once made a prince cry into his lentil stew. She welcomes you like an old friend, offers pomegranate wine, and gestures to her collection of parasols arranged in niches along a stucco wall like ancient trophies. Each one tells a story. That one, she says, pointing to a delicate thing made of translucent reeds, was used in a temple procession for Tammuz, carried by a priestess who insisted it made her more divine. That one, she says, of a square red parasol with gold fringe, was stolen from an Assyrian ambassador, legally of course, through marriage. And that one, tucked into the shadows, looks suspiciously like a large fan with handles. That's just for hitting people who block the breeze, she jokes. Probably. Quirky tidbit. There's evidence that some noble families trained parasol attendants, yes, full-time shade holders, who had to practice precise positioning for maximum coverage during meals, performances, even naps. One clay tablet even outlines a scoring system. Shade coverage, 0 to 10. Offense by shadow spill, automatic disqualification. Nabitu offers to demonstrate. She calls for her servant who, with impressive grace, holds a parasol just above her shoulder. She steps, he pivots. She turns, he spins. It's a dance, smooth and practiced. You try it. You're terrible. Your parasol slaps you in the face like a damp apology. Nabitu laughs until she hiccups. She leads you to her garden, where the parasols hang upside down from tree branches like giant bats. Some are strung with soft clay chimes that tinkle in the breeze. Others, painted on the inside, cast subtle colors across the ground: pink, lilac, sea glass green. The garden feels like a kaleidoscope of cooling thoughts. Historians still argue whether these parasol gardens were purely decorative or held ritual significance. Some think they symbolized divine protection. Others believe they were simply a flex, like, oh, you have olive trees? Cute, I grow shade. Nabitu sits by a low table, pours more wine, and shares a rumor that King Nabonidus once owned a parasol made from meteor-woven cloth, stronger than bronze, lighter than linen, and possibly cursed. Or blessed, she shrugs. Hard to tell with royalty. As you sip, she hands you a clay seal shaped like a curled-up cat. For luck, she says, and in case you meet another parasol thief, they're everywhere. You thank her and leave through a side gate that opens onto a narrow path flanked by river reeds. The moon hangs low, silver and silent, and your borrowed parasol casts a gentle shadow that walks beside you like a sleepy ghost. As you reach the river, you pause. It's quiet here. The kind of quiet you feel more than here. Water laps against the bank. Somewhere, a bullfrog regrets its decisions. And above, parasols forgotten on balconies flutter slightly in the breeze, as if waving goodnight. You sit. You open your shade, not to block the moon, but just to feel its weight in your hand, to hold something that once held the sun, and to wonder how many others, in how many other centuries, did the same thing. Reached for a circle of cloth and ribs and said, "This is mine. This is enough." The wind picks up slightly. You think of Tunic, of Akil, of Irdaniah and Nabitu, and every maker, thinker, and daydreamer who stitched a little sanity into the shape of a shade. You wonder if anyone will ever hold a parasol and think of you. Then again, maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe it's enough to have walked this far under the same sky they once shaded themselves from. You close your eyes, still holding the parasol open, and drift for just a moment, not asleep, not awake, just shaded. Awaiting continue. You awaken to the gentle tickle of sunrise across your cheek. Or maybe it's just a mosquito with bad aim. Either way, the sky is slowly brightening into something more peach than pitch, and Babylon is beginning to stretch its limbs and yawn. Your borrowed parasol rests beside you, one corner damp with river dew. It's early, even the street cats are still discussing whether to bother with breakfast mice. But already, the city stirs. Merchants arrange their wares, temple priests begin their chants, and water bearers clank along in rhythmic trios, gossiping in half whispers. You stand, stretch, and follow the riverbank toward one last place you've heard about, a sight whispered by craftsmen, scribes, and garden nobles alike. The rumored first shade, the proto-parasol, a scrap of speculation wrapped in myth and half-burned scrolls. Mainstream historical fact. While Babylon thrived in the first millennium BCE, earlier Mesopotamian cities like Ur and Nippur had already developed complex infrastructures, temples, irrigation, even early libraries. And it's within one of these old temple ruins, they say, that the oldest depiction of a shade-like device still exists. Not a parasol exactly, more of a sun deflector on a stick. but still, the ancestor of them all. You hitch a ride on a grain cart headed vaguely in that direction. The driver, a sun-leathered woman named Daria, shares honeyed bread and stories about camel markets and a ghost who once haunted her third husband's sandals. When you ask about the shade artifact, she chuckles. "Ah, the first umbrella," she says, rolling her eyes fondly. "More legend than lint. But yes, the temple at Nippur has a carving. Little man, big hat, larger stick. Nobody agrees what it is. Some say it's ceremonial. Others think he just hated tanning. Quirky tidbit. There's genuine archaeological debate over a small but weathered carving in the ruins of Nippur, dated to around 2100 BCE. The figure holds what looks like a flattened oval on a long handle. Some believe it's a fan, others a sacred palm frond, but the angle, the posture, and a few worn lines around the edges suggest a primitive parasol, if not in function, then in symbolic intention. You reach the site just as the sun peaks over the horizon. Nippur is quiet, half buried, and strangely beautiful, like a memory made of dust and stubborn brick. An old priest lets you in without question. Tourists aren't exactly swarming the place. Inside the crumbling ziggurat, the air is cool and still. You step over cracks, around toppled columns, and into a chamber where time seems to sleep. And there it is, barely knee-height, worn smooth by wind and wonder. A carved figure, stylized and small, with a flat headgear and a circle suspended over his shoulder. You lean in. The circle's outline is faint, not quite closed, more crescent than complete. Historians still argue whether the object is functional, ceremonial, or metaphorical. Was it meant to shade, to sanctify, or to simply say, "Look how important I am. I've got a guy to hold my sun shield"? Some scholars propose it was part of a funerary rite. Others insist it was nothing more than an oddly carved fig leaf. The debates get weird, heated, parasol politics, you suppose. You sit before it and stare. It's underwhelming, which somehow makes it more powerful. Not a grand monument, not a golden relic, just a lump of forgotten stone that maybe, just maybe, began a tradition of gentling the sun. And now look where that led. Feathered parasols, spinning canopies, linen stitched with poetry. And you, standing in the hush of an ancient chamber, imagining the heat of 4,000-year-old sunlight in the first person who ever thought, "I wish I didn't have to squint this much." You sketch the carving in the margin of Akil's scroll, just beside the inked memory of the folding reed parasol. It's not pretty, but it feels right. A little lopsided, a little sleepy. You leave a token behind, a pressed flower from Irdenia's chime garden. Tuck it near the base of the carving. A silent thank you, from one shade seeker to another. Outside, the wind has picked up. The city of Nippur breathes in gentle gusts, and your parasol flutters slightly in response. You unfurl it again, not because the sun is harsh, but because it feels like part of the ritual now. A soft laugh escapes you. What a strange thing, this devotion to shade. But maybe not so strange. In a land of blazing suns and stories told in brick, the simplest gestures often last the longest. A bowl of water, a handful of dates, a patch of shadow held aloft. You walk back slowly, the ruins at your back and the breeze at your heels. A child passes you on the road, squinting into the sun, and you hand her the little basil-scented parasol. She takes it like it's a crown. You don't need it anymore. Your shade's somewhere inside you now. Not in a metaphorical, poetic way, but in the very literal, "Please don't take those into my house" kind of way. But you don't mind. You've walked across empires in a single night, across centuries and courtyards and tiny back alleys echoing with history and foot odor. You're headed home, or whatever version of home your half-sleeping brain imagines now, a place with cushions, lentils, and ideally, no historical debates about sacred shade sticks. The path takes you back through the outskirts of Babylon, past looms and bakeries already clanging into motion. Clay kilns puff little sighs of smoke. A child tries to bribe a goose with raisins. It goes badly. But your destination isn't domestic. Not yet. One more stop, one final shade. You reach a quiet plaza nestled in a public bathhouse and a sleepy scribe school. There's a stone circle here, carved with weathered inscriptions, part monument, part mystery, known locally as the Shadow Ring. Mainstream historical fact, ancient Babylon placed great importance on celestial observation. Shadow measurements, cast by gnomons, early sundials, were part of both astronomy and daily ritual. Time itself was tracked using shade. The shadow ring, historians believe, was either a teaching tool or a kind of sacred sundial, a way of measuring the divine in increments of dimness. You step into the ring, stand in the center, no one else is here. The morning sun, now fully risen, casts your shadow like a slow sword across the stone. Markers on the ring trace the hours, the seasons, the solstices. Your shadow points directly at the glyph for return. You smirk. Babylon always did know how to stage an exit. Quirky tidbit: some Mesopotamian tablets describe shadows as invisible scribes, recording deeds on the earth as a person walks. The longer the shadow, the more the story. Shade wasn't just a shield, it was a witness. So it's fitting maybe that your final parasol, a ceremonial one borrowed from a temple guard too sleepy to argue, catches the wind as you step out of the ring. It spins, not in some grand cinematic arc, but in a floppy Fabricy tumble. Lands near a group of napping goats. One bleats once, unbothered. You leave it there. Shade, after all, isn't something to hoard. Historians still argue whether the obsession with shade was driven by practicality, spirituality, or sheer aesthetic flair. Some say the parasol was status. Others that it was intimacy, an extension of one's personal space in a very crowded world. You've decided it was probably both, and also fun. There's something undeniably joyful about carrying a tiny sky above your head. You pass a painter selling tiles with miniature parasols etched in blue glaze. One features a lion lounging under a daisy-patterned canopy. You buy it, not because you need it, but because it feels like the right thing to do. And suddenly you're in a small crowd. Traders, artisans, travelers, each holding their own form of shade. Woven hats, draped scarves. One man has fashioned an entire head tent using scrolls and stubbornness. It's not attractive, but it's committed. A storyteller nearby recites the fable of Enlil's forgotten umbrella, a sky god who once tried to block the sun with a rain cloud shaped like a wing. It worked too well. The crops complained. You laugh, and for the first time all night, you stop moving, because there's nothing else to find. You follow the parasol from riverbank to rooftop, from temple to tomb, and every shade along the way has whispered a version of the same thing. Rest is resistance. Shade is sacred. Also, don't forget to hydrate. The crowd shifts, the city wakes, and your shadow, thin and tired, waves across the stones like a sigh. You tuck the tile into your satchel, duck beneath the eave of a shop still opening for the day, and sit. No parasol, no destination, just you, a breeze, and the faint aftertaste of wine from an evening that somehow spanned millennia. A boy passes carrying a jug of oil. You hand him the last of your bread and tell him to walk in the shade. He nods solemnly, as if you've imparted some ancient wisdom. Maybe you have, because when it's all said and done, when the cities fall, the scrolls crumble, and the fashion trends shift from palm frond chic to who knows what, somewhere, someone will still tilt a parasol skyward, just to soften the glare. And maybe think of Babylon, and maybe for a moment, feel less alone. You close your eyes under the awning, the scent of warm clay and cumin drifting on the air, the hum of early trade, the clip of sandals over stone, the flitter of gossip between bread vendors, all of it softens into a background lullaby. You're not asleep yet, but your body thinks you're headed there. Your shoulders slacken, your breath steadies. Somewhere between the cradle of sunlight and the memory of feathered canopies, you drift. Still, there's one more story, the last parasol, or rather the one that never was. You dream, or imagine, or both, about a craftsman from Kish, centuries before Babylon's prime. He spends his days carving combs, but at night he sketches wild inventions in the dirt outside his home. One evening, a storm breaks, and he watches as a palm frond catches in the wind, shading his mother as she scurries toward shelter. The idea roots itself in him. Mainstream historical fact: the earliest Mesopotamian cities had well-developed textile industries. Flax, wool, and even imported silks were used not just for garments, but for furnishings and ceremonial banners. Some scholars argue parasol-like devices could have evolved from these canopy traditions, especially in ritual or royal processions. So our craftsman weaves reeds, strings linen, and binds them with copper wire stolen, borrowed, from a priest's broken headdress. His first prototype collapses. The second works until it rains, but the third stands. He presents it to a visiting governor, who laughs until the canopy shields him from a surprise burst of midday heat. The man pauses, adjusts the shade, and mutters something about royal potential. Quirky tidbit: a clay tablet fragment discovered near Kish includes a doodle, yes, an actual ancient doodle, of what appears to be a man holding a stick above a second man. Some say it's a parasol, others insist it's just a shepherd with a fishing spear. But the figure underneath has his eyes closed and a faint smile carved in his stylized face. Peaceful. Asleep, maybe. Historians still argue whether innovations like the parasol began as practical tools or status displays. The truth probably lies in the overlap. Shade meant comfort, but in a place like Mesopotamia, it also meant control. Only those with power could pause in the heat. Everyone else just sweated and prayed. You stir slightly, half lulled by the thought. Even now, the umbrella isn't really about weather. It's a boundary line, a personal moment of control, your own little ecosystem. And in that space, under that shade, people relax, dream, maybe even change history. As the city bustles around you, a sandstorm gathers in the far distance, just a curtain of amber along the horizon. But no one hurries. Everyone knows when it will arrive, how long it will last. Babylon's schedule works with the wind, not against it. You stand, finally, stretch. Your back cracks like an old clay tablet. You glance toward the tile in your satchel, still safe. A tiny reminder of the thousands of years it took for someone to think, what if the sky had a handle? And then, slowly, with a quiet you didn't realize you'd earned, you walk toward the place where the parasol's story ends. Or perhaps just begins again. Because after all that talk of invention, rituals, status, and scrolls, sometimes it really is just about not wanting to get sunburned. And that's okay. Wind down. And now wherever you are, maybe curled beneath your own blanket fortress, or listening to this with the volume down low while your cat plots world domination, let this be the moment you truly settle. The journey's over. You've wandered across ancient rooftops, listened to dusty prophets, and debated with scholars, both real and slightly drunk. You've held parasols stitched with stars and seen shadow turn into time itself. There's no more walking to do, no more questions to chase. Just quiet. Breathe in through your nose, slow and easy. Let your shoulders melt just a little further into the pillow. Let the soft hum of night sounds, wherever you are, fill the edges of your mind like warm tea into a favorite mug. The ancient world is quiet now. The markets have gone still. The scrolls are rolled tight and tucked away. The last parasol has been folded, its cloth humming faintly in the breeze like the sigh of someone finally allowed to rest. And you're safe here. There's nowhere to be, no sun to dodge. Just the gentle hush of sleep curling around you like the softest kind of shadow. So close your eyes, traveler of time and trivia, and let yourself drift. You've earned the shade. End of script. Sweet dreams.